Before you listen to this story, let me tell you something about family. It's supposed to be your first shield against the cruelty of the world. The place where love breathes and betrayal is unthinkable. But when that same bloodline turns against you, when the people you trusted the most tear your soul apart, what do? You survive, you rise, and when the time comes, you take everything back. This is the story of Isabella Raeven, a quiet girl from Georgia who lost everything when her own family sold her out, but she didn't stay broken. What came next was a storm none of them saw coming. A storm named Revenge. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Isabella Raeven was only 16 when the truth began to unravel, quiet and deadly like the storm that took her father's boat off the coast of Tybee Island. It started with a whisper she wasn't meant to hear, a midnight conversation behind closed doors, her uncle's voice slicing through the thin wood panels of their farmhouse like a knife. That night she learned two things, but her father's death was no accident, and that blood meant nothing in the face of greed. Her family, the ones who raised her, had betrayed the man who loved them most for land, money, and to see it. The mayor's table. She remembered clutching her knees under the kitchen counter, the old floor creaking beneath her as her aunt's voice joined in, cold and sharp. It's done. Now all that's left is to keep her quiet. Her, Isabella. At 16, she learned she was next. The days that followed were a blur of fake condolences and staged tears. Her cousins Callum, James, and shy little Lacey looked at her differently now. There was pity in their eyes and something else. Fear? Guilt? Or perhaps just the awareness that they had taken everything from her. Isabella wore her grief like armor. She stopped speaking. She stopped crying. And she waited. She didn't know it then, but the fire inside her had already been lit. A slow-burning rage, hot and silent, curling around her ribs like smoke. She knew she couldn't stay. Not under the roof of murderers. So one night she packed a bag, stole her father's silver compass from the drawer, and disappeared into the Georgia woods. For weeks she survived on river water, old apples, and a burning desire to live. She crossed state lines, hitchhiked her way to Tennessee, then Kentucky. And whatever you're running from, kid, make sure you know what you're running to. Under Marcus's roof, Isabella became someone else. She learned how to fight, how to shoot, how to outthink, and outmaneuver. By the time she was 20, she was unrecognizable, a quiet, calculating force of nature with scars on her knuckles and a fire in her eyes that made most men step back. She worked part-time fixing cars, spent nights studying law books and crime reports, and all the while she built her revenge like an architect with blueprints made of rage. It took 5 years to gather what she needed. The proof, the witnesses, the secrets her family thought they buried. Turns out you can buy a lot with patience, a lot more with silence. And people love to talk when they think no one's listening. Isabella found out the truth. Her father, Daniel Raeven, had discovered a land fraud scheme involving her uncle, her cousin Callum, and several city officials. He threatened to expose them. Days later, he died in that stage boating accident. The autopsy had been faked. The insurance money split. The evidence erased until Isabella found a fisherman who saw a speedboat near the wreck that night. Until she found the original coroner's assistant, now living under a fake name in Texas, who admitted to forging the report. Isabella didn't want justice. She wanted devastation. So she returned. It was a cool October morning when she stepped back into Georgia soil, dressed in black jeans, boots, and a leather jacket that carried the weight of her past. Tybee Island hadn't changed much. The same broken roads, the same church bells, the same family name hanging above the Raeven estate like a lie etched in wood. But Isabella? She was a storm in human form now. She started small. An anonymous tip. Here, a leaked file there. She hacked into Callum's emails, exposed city contracts, leaked footage of her uncle at a bribe meeting. The press went wild. FBI opened investigations. But it wasn't enough. She wanted them to feel it. So she started sending letters handwritten, inked in red. You forgot what you did. I didn't. Signed. Ire. Panic set in. Her aunt started seeing ghosts. Callum hired private security. James fled to New York. Lacey tried to overdose, and Isabella watched. When her uncle was finally arrested, the look on his face wasn't fear, it was confusion. He hadn't seen it coming. That's the thing about betrayal. It blinds you to the ones you've broken. He looked at the woman in the courthouse gallery, the one with calm eyes and a smirk beneath her scarf, and it took him a full 5 seconds to recognize his niece. By then, it was too late because Isabella didn't just want to ruin them, she wanted them to live ruined. Isabella didn't smile when her uncle was led away in handcuffs. She didn't weep or speak to the press or look toward the cameras. She simply turned away from the courthouse and vanished into the shadows of a city that once knew her as the grieving daughter of Daniel Raven. But that was the old version of her, the soft-hearted girl who believed that justice came from the law. That version was buried in the ground with her father. What stood in her place now was a woman forged in silence, sharpened by pain, and trained by vengeance. And she wasn't done, not even close. Her uncle's arrest was only the beginning. The storm she had summoned over Tybee Island was still gathering force. The next target was Callum, the eldest cousin. Charming, privileged, corrupt to the core. He had inherited more than just money from his father. He'd inherited the arrogance, the cruelty, and the sense of invincibility that came with generations of unchecked power. After his father's arrest, Callum doubled down. He hired lawyers, silenced journalists, paid off officials, but even he couldn't escape what was coming. Isabella had been inside his house. She knew his passwords. She knew the location of his safe, the burner phones, the photographs he kept hidden in a locked drawer behind a fake panel in the study. Photos of meetings, people he shouldn't have been seen with, places he swore he'd never been. Men in dark coats exchanging envelopes. Isabella leaked everything anonymously, quietly, strategically. Not all at once. She wanted to watch him sweat. She released just enough to trigger suspicion. Just enough to make his allies nervous. The sharks began to circle, contracts were pulled. Stocks dropped. His face appeared on morning talk shows as an alleged co-conspirator in a growing scandal. Then she made it personal. One night, Callum returned home to find a note under his pillow. Written in the same red ink as before, "You took his life. Now I'll dismantle yours, one lie at a time, no signature. Just the initials, IR." He turned his house into a fortress. Surveillance cameras, motion sensors, guards on rotation. But fear isn't something you can fence out. It lives in your skin. It whispers when you're alone. And soon, Callum began to unravel. He stopped sleeping. He drank more. He made mistakes. Isabella was waiting for them. She leaked audio of him confessing to an old partner that the Raven land deeds were forged. It aired on national news. The next day, a Senate committee launched a new investigation, and Callum, he tried to flee. Isabella let him. She tracked his flight to a private airstrip outside Charleston. Then she tipped off the U.S. Marshals. He was pulled off the runway and arrested. Screaming about ghosts and lies, another Raven down, but the heart of the betrayal, the root of the rot, was someone far closer, her aunt. Eliza Raven, the woman who used to brush Isabella's hair and tuck her in at night. The one who whispered in the dark that family means forever. The same woman who signed her husband's death plan, smiled at the funeral, and told reporters that Daniel had been like a brother to her. Eliza had always been the quiet one, the tactician. The one who sat behind the curtain and pulled the strings while the men played their dirty games. But Isabella had seen her mask slip once, years ago, in a moment of drunken honesty during a Thanksgiving toast. Eliza had laughed and said, "In the end, all that matters is the legacy we leave. And mine won't be left to a dead man's child." Isabella never forgot it. Now Eliza lived alone in the mansion at the edge of the marshes, surrounded by staff who didn't speak unless spoken to, and rooms filled with silence and shadows. She'd outlived her husband, outlasted her sons. Freedom, and still thought she would walk away untouched. But Isabella was coming for her last. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closure. It was about burning the disease at its source. So Isabella went back to Tybee, not in disguise, not in fear. She walked right up to the old estate, stood at the iron gate, and rang the bell. The camera above blinked to life. A voice crackled through. "Who is it?" She looked into the lens and said calmly, "Tell Eliza her past has come home." There was silence. Then the gates opened. She was let in by a housekeeper who wouldn't meet her eyes. The air inside smelled like old perfume and forgotten dreams. Eliza was waiting in the parlor, sitting beneath a portrait of her late husband, a glass of sherry in her hand. Her hair had gone white. Her eyes were lined with years of worry. But her voice was steady, cold. "I wondered when you'd show up," she said. "You've been busy." Isabella didn't sit. She didn't blink. "You murdered my father." "No," Eliza replied. "We removed an obstacle, one that would have destroyed this family." "You destroyed this family." Eliza sipped her drink. "So what now? You came here to kill me?" Isabella stepped closer. "No, death is mercy. I came here to make sure you live long enough to see the Raven name reduced to ash. I came to watch you lose." And she did. That same day, Isabella dropped the final files to the press. Financial fraud, political bribery, blackmail, evidence that Eliza had orchestrated the entire conspiracy behind the scenes. Within hours, federal agents raided the estate. Isabella stood outside and watched them drag her aunt out in handcuffs, screaming about blood and betrayal, the last chain had broken, but revenge. It doesn't heal. It burns, consumes, leaves only silence in its wake. In the weeks that followed, Isabella stayed in Tybee, not to gloat, not to rebuild, but to remember. She visited her father's grave each morning and left behind a single white rose. She walked the shorelines they used to explore. She sat beneath the cypress tree where he once told her stories about stars and gods and how the sea always takes back what is stolen. One night, as the waves crashed and the wind howled, she whispered to the ocean, "I did it, Dad. They're gone." But her voice trembled, because victory, when built on vengeance, is always a lonely throne. And in the quiet that followed, Isabella Raeven realized something. She wasn't the girl who had run. She wasn't the woman who came back. She was something else now, something reborn, not in blood, but in truth. And the truth? It was finally hers. The air on Tybee Island felt different now, cleaner, lighter, but not entirely peaceful. Not yet. The Raven name still lingered in whispers and headlines. Investigations were still unfolding. Homes were being searched, bank accounts frozen, and yet, for Isabella, it all felt strangely distant. As if the war she'd been fighting for years had ended, but the battlefield still trembled beneath her feet. People in town began to look at her differently, some with admiration, others with fear. Many didn't recognize her at all, their memories still attached to the image of a grieving teenage girl with tear-streaked cheeks and no voice. That girl was dead and buried. Isabella walked among them like a shadow of justice, a whisper of vengeance fulfilled, but deep inside, she wasn't sure what came next. For years, her life had revolved around one purpose: vengeance. Each step, each breath was designed to lead her back to that final confrontation. Now, with the Raven dynasty crumbling and her enemies in shackles, she found herself staring into a future that had no script, no plan. Just silence. Until one rainy evening, a man arrived at her door. She was staying in a small cabin on the edge of the marshland, quiet, tucked away behind Spanish moss and oak trees. The kind of place her father would have chosen: humble, strong, close to nature. She had just finished making tea when the knock came. Slow, measured. She opened the door, half expecting a reporter or a federal agent, but the man on the porch wasn't either. He was tall, late 40s, salt and pepper beard, and sharp eyes that belonged to someone who'd seen too much. He wore a black trench coat soaked in rain, and when he spoke, his voice was like gravel. "You're Isabella Raeven?" She didn't answer. He continued, "Name's Agent Thomas Gray. I'm with a federal task force. You exposed a rot in Georgia. Miss Raeven, what you did, it's going to unravel things far beyond Tybee Island." Still, she said nothing. He reached into his coat slowly, pulled out a file, and handed it to her. "There are more like your family, networks, deep-rooted corruption. But most people don't have the courage or the fire you have. We've been watching what you did. And we need someone like you." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Need me? To go deeper, to take this fight beyond your backyard." She looked down at the file. Inside were names, photos, timelines. People connected not just to the Raven fraud, but to a national web of political corruption, criminal alliances, and institutional betrayal. "You want me to work for the government?" "No," he said simply. "I want you to help us burn the parts of it that are already rotten." It should have felt strange. It should have felt wrong, but Isabella felt something else. Purpose. "I'll think about it," she said. Agent Gray nodded. "You have 3 days." After that, we'll assume you're staying retired." He turned and walked back into the storm, leaving her alone again. Except now she wasn't surrounded by silence. The fire in her chest had returned different now. Not the fire of revenge, but of justice. Of a new beginning. She spent the night reading every name in the file. One of them stood out. Victor Kane, a powerful lobbyist. Connected to her uncles. Land deals. Rumored to be tied to black sites in Mexico and untraceable campaign funds. He wasn't just a politician, he was a puppeteer. And the more she read, the more she realized her family was just a piece on his board, a disposable asset. She hadn't reached the top of the chain, not yet. Victor Kane lived in Savannah. He owned half the coastline, ran his empire through shell companies, and operated in plain sight. To the public, he was a philanthropist. To those who mattered, he was untouchable, but no one was untouchable to Isabella anymore. She made the call. "I'm in," she told Agent Gray the next morning. The response was simple. Then welcome to the black. From that day forward, Isabella Raeven was no longer just a survivor or a daughter avenged. She became a weapon. Gray's team trained her in deeper tactics, digital forensics, infiltration, extraction. But Isabella didn't need much. She was already sharper than most operatives. Her mind was a vault of strategy. Her rage had refined into precision. Within 2 months, she was on a plane to D.C. under the alias Evelyn Black. Her mission: get close to Kane, uncover his network, and dismantle the empire that had once used her family like pawns. To do that, she had to walk into the lion's den. She wore a dress for the first time in years, black, sleeveless, with a neckline that suggested power and grace. Her hair was up, her face calm. She entered the fundraiser Kane was hosting at a private hotel with poise that turned heads. No one knew who she was. But by the end of the night, everyone wanted to, especially him. Victor Kane was charming, polished, but when he shook her hand, Isabella saw it. The hollow behind his eyes. The same hunger she had seen in her uncle. The same decay. He asked her name. She gave it. "Evelyn Black. You new in town?" He asked. She smiled. "Let's just say I've come to clean up some messes." He laughed. "You'll fit right in." Within weeks, she was working for one of his firms. She played the role flawlessly, loyal, ambitious, efficient. But behind the smile, she was stealing files, cloning drives, tracking shipments. She sent data to Gray in encrypted bursts. Every day, she got closer to the truth. Every night, she felt the weight of deception tightening around her, but she didn't stop. Until one day, Kane looked at her differently. Not with curiosity, but with suspicion. "You remind me of someone," he said in his office, fingers steepled, eyes watching. "Do I?" She replied coolly. He leaned forward. Someone who cost me a lot." She didn't blink. "Sounds like you need better friends." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, she found a hidden camera planted in her apartment. The game had changed. She called Gray. "He knows. We'll extract you." "No," she said. "Not yet." "Isabella, I didn't come this far to run. I finished this." Gray hesitated. "Then you have 72 hours. After that, I'm pulling you out whether you like it or not." 3 days. That was all she had to bring down a man who had his claws in everything from the White House to the Mexican cartel. 3 days to do the impossible. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She hunted. And as the hours ticked down, Isabella Raeven prepared for the most dangerous move of her life. 72 hours. That was the window Isabella Raeven, now Evelyn Black, had to tear down Victor Kane's empire. She had infiltrated the lion's den, earned the trust of one of the most powerful men in America, and now she stood on the knife's edge, dancing between exposure and annihilation. She stared at the wall of encrypted files on her laptop, her mind racing with plans, possibilities, and risks. Every document she had collected painted a broader, more terrifying picture. Kane's network stretched from Washington to Mexico City, linked to trafficking rings, military-grade weapons sales, and global political manipulation. Her family had been nothing but pawns in a much larger game, and Kane? He was the architect Isabella could have run. She could have handed the data to the feds and disappeared again, but that would have been mercy, and Isabella had no mercy left. In her veins, she poured herself a whiskey neat and sat in front of her window, looking out at the Capitol silhouette against the midnight sky. Every beat of her heart reminded her why she was still breathing, why she hadn't let herself die in the Georgia woods all those years ago, because this was never just about survival. It was about setting fire to the monsters who think they'll never burn. The next morning, she walked into Kane's building. Like it was any other day. Her heels echoed on the marble floors. Her expression was calm, confident. She'd rehearsed every movement, every breath. She was no longer the girl hiding in the shadows. She was the shadow. Her plan was in motion. At precisely 9:03 a.m., she accessed Kane's restricted network, using a cloned admin credential she'd extracted 2 nights earlier. By 9:07, she had transferred 67 terabytes of incriminating files onto a secure external drive, masked as a hair clip, names, wire transfers, murders, black sites, everything. But she didn't stop there. She wanted Kane to watch his world collapse. In real time. So at 10:15 a.m., as Kane prepared for a board meeting on the top floor, Isabella uploaded a virus, a ghost program that would lock every server in the building and replace all monitor displays with one message: your blood has stained too many hands. Now it's your turn to drown in it. IR. She slipped into the elevator and hit the top floor. Victor Kane was already standing at the long conference table when she entered, surrounded by lawyers, partners, and political allies. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him showcased the Washington skyline, clean and proud, but when he saw her, he froze. He knew the elevators locked behind her. Emergency lights flashed red, and one by one, the monitors flickered and went black only. To display the message she had written, the room exploded into chaos. Phones were pulled. Orders shouted, and Kane? He stared at her like a man staring into the barrel of a gun. Who are you? He demanded, stepping forward. She smiled, slow, calm, venomous. I told you once. I'm here to clean up your mess. Evelyn. He began, but she cut him off. My name, she said, pulling the gun from beneath her coat, is Isabella Raeven, daughter of Daniel Raven. Remember him? Silence. I remember what you did to my father. What you did to my family. You thought we were disposable. That no one would ever come for you. Kane stepped back, panic rising in his throat. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, she interrupted, her voice steel. I do. I've known since the day you had my father drown like an animal. I've spent the last 6 years studying you, Kane, every deal, every bribe, every murder. You were the endgame, and now? She pointed the gun at the glass wall behind him. Now I want you to watch your kingdom fall. Suddenly, the doors were breached. Gray's agents stormed the room in full tactical gear. Isabella didn't flinch. She knew they were coming. It was part of the plan. She lowered the gun and stepped back, hands raised. Kane was dragged out in cuffs, screaming about entrapment and conspiracies. But no one listened, because every screen across the country was now lighting up with headlines. Billionaire lobbyist. Victor Kane arrested in massive federal corruption probe. Leaked documents tie Kane to 37 unsolved deaths. High-level government fraud. Anonymous whistleblower unleashes political earthquake. Isabella walked out of the building as news helicopters circled overhead. The wind whipped through her coat. The sun broke through the clouds. She was free, or so she thought. 2 days later, she sat across from Agent Gray at a quiet diner in Arlington. The file was closed. The mission complete. You did more in 3 months than most operatives do in this. The mission complete. You did more in 3 mission complete. You did more in 3 months than most operatives do in a career, he said. I'm not an operative, she replied. You are now. He slid a folder across the table. There's more out there. Kane was just one head of a very large beast. She didn't open it. Not yet. You think I want to do this again? She asked. I think you don't know how to stop. He wasn't wrong, because as much as she wanted peace, as much as she longed for her father's boat, the quiet shores of Tybee and a life without blood, Isabella also knew this truth. The world was broken, and she was built to fix it, even if that meant becoming a monster to hunt monsters. She left the diner with the folder in hand. Inside it, a single name. Another man, another empire. Another lie waiting to be burned, and beneath it, scribbled in Gray's writing, let me know if you're still hungry. Isabella smiled. Hungry didn't even begin to cover it. A week after Victor Kane's arrest, America was still trembling from the shockwaves. Media outlets dissected every detail of the scandal, politicians scrambled to sever ties, and whistleblower conspiracy theories flooded every corner of the internet. But amidst the chaos, one name remained unknown to the world: Isabella Raeven. No photographs, no statements, no fingerprints on any of the leaks. As far as the public knew, the storm had no face, but inside the intelligence community her name had become legend. Agent Gray called it the Raven effect, the idea that one woman, forged in grief and vengeance, had the power to burn down entire systems from within. His superiors were skeptical at first. But when the arrests tripled, when foreign bank accounts were frozen, and when Kane's allies began turning on each other like panicked wolves, they stopped asking questions. Isabella was offered full clearance, a new identity, government protection. She refused it all, because she wasn't in this for medals or headlines. She wasn't anyone's hero. She was a weapon of purpose, and she hadn't finished cutting yet. The next name in Gray's file was Mikhail Rostov, Russian-American arms broker with diplomatic immunity, a golden passport, and connections buried deep in the intelligence world. His money had funded private war, surveillance, and layers of encrypted communication systems. But Isabella didn't come to knock. She came to haunt, using a stolen diplomat ID. Isabella infiltrated a gala hosted at the Annex. She wore white, this time a bold, disarming contrast to the black she'd worn in D.C. Her presence was like a thread of silk across a blade, elegant but fatal. Rostov noticed her instantly. New, too. Prague? He asked, holding out a hand. New to the circle, she replied, her voice soft but firm. He smiled. I like new things. Over the next 3 days, she moved through his world like smoke, gathering access codes, duplicating thumb drives, seducing secrets out of guards and staff. She learned of a shipment scheduled for the Yemeni coast missiles disguised as medical crates. She learned about a shell company laundering blood money through a European orphanage fund, and she learned something else. Rostov didn't just fund Kane, he ordered her father's death. The deal Kane made in Georgia had been financed with Rostov's money. When Daniel Raven threatened exposure, it was Rostov who had ordered the hit. Not because he cared about land in Georgia, but because he couldn't risk a paper trail. That night, Isabella stood on the rooftop of a hotel overlooking the Vltava River. The lights of Prague shimmered in the water below, beautiful and cold. She stared at the encrypted drive in her hand, every part of her screaming for revenge, but she didn't act yet. This time, she needed more than vengeance. She needed the entire machine to fall. On the final night of her stay, Rostov invited her to a private dinner in the garden behind his estate. The table was set with crystal, candlelight, and imported wine. He wore a velvet coat and an easy smile, but his eyes were sharp, testing her. Who are you, really? He asked, swirling his glass. She leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Someone who's been watching you for a very long time. He raised an eyebrow. Careful. Curiosity is dangerous in my world. She smiled slowly. So is complacency. In that moment, Rostov knew. His hand reached for something under the table, but Isabella was faster, a knife hidden in. Her boot embedded itself in his shoulder before he could scream. The guards rushed in, but they were already dead. Gray's team had arrived minutes earlier, silent, swift, ruthless. Within hours, the estate was locked down. Servers seized, phones scrubbed. Bodies disappeared. Rostov survived, but only barely. He would spend the rest of his life in a military prison in an undisclosed location. No trials, no press. Just silence and isolation, the kind his victims never got. Back in D.C., Gray handed Isabella a sealed envelope. Inside this, he said, is everything you need to walk away. A new name. A clean life, a way out. She didn't open it. I'm not done, Gray sighed. You never will be, will you? She looked out the window at the sunrise touching the edge of the Potomac River. When monsters build empires, she said, someone has to burn the blueprints. Gray gave a faint smile. You're not justice, Raven. You're vengeance. I'm both, she replied, and I've only just started. Later that night, she found herself standing at her father's grave again. The Georgia wind was warm, carrying salt and memories. I thought it would feel like peace, she whispered. But it just feels necessary. She knelt and placed a new compass on the stone. A gift from Gray's team etched with a single phrase. Let your silence be their warning. She stood up slowly. The world was wide again, broken, ruthless, unforgiving, but now it had Isabella Raeven in it, and for every corrupt hand still pulling strings. She was coming. A month after the Rostov takedown, the world was quieter, but only on the surface. In truth, the shadows were shifting. Power vacuums don't stay empty for long. With every empire Isabella Raeven brought to its knees, 2 more vultures appeared to claim what was left behind. She knew that. She had accepted it, but that didn't mean she would stop. She'd become something the world didn't quite understand. Yet a scalpel in a war full of hammers, quiet, precise, unrelenting. And as governments scrambled, agencies reorganized, and names vanished from public records, one quiet war remained active beneath them all. The war against the Foundation. It was a whisper. A name she'd only heard once on a decrypted file from Kane's private server. No faces, no photographs, no clear locations. Just a symbol, a circle with a vertical slash through it. According to the notes, the Foundation wasn't a group or a government. It was an idea. An international network of power, operating above borders, fueled by a philosophy: stability through control. They didn't play by rules, they wrote them, and Isabella had just gotten their attention. The first sign came in the form of a black envelope delivered to her private safe house in Berlin. There was no return address, no name, just a folded card inside with a message: "We've been watching, stop now or we stop you." She burned the card immediately, but she didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, because of clarity. She had climbed through the dirt and fire for 6 years, lost everything, buried her identity, become a ghost. And now, standing at the edge of the world's deepest secret, she felt focused. Finally, the battlefield made sense. She wasn't just fighting for her father anymore. She was fighting to tear out the root of the rot. Gray was furious. "You don't understand what this is," he said, pacing the underground command room of their Brussels outpost. "This isn't Kane or Rostov. This is beyond reach. These are people with no fingerprints, no birth records, no countries." "Good," Isabella said. "Then they have nowhere to hide." Gray leaned forward, hands on the table. "If you poke this nest, we might not be able to protect you." "I didn't ask for protection," she replied. "I asked for names." He slid a file across the table. "1. That's all I can give you." A whisper. A rumor. "He's one of theirs, maybe. Name's Dr. Alden Voss, corporate bioengineer, philanthropist, secretly linked to 2 chemical outbreaks in Africa and 1 in South America, all labeled as natural disasters." Isabella opened the file. A face stared back at her, calm, cold, precise. "A man who played God for money," she exhaled. "Where is he?" Gray didn't answer for a moment, then Singapore. The city was a neon dream, modern and fast, pulsing with wealth and secrets. Isabella moved through it like a whisper. Her mission was silent. No weapons, no teams. Just surveillance, infiltration, and exposure. Voss operated under the guise of a humanitarian biotech company. His labs were pristine, his records spotless. But Isabella knew how to read between the lines. And what she found buried in his archives was horrifying. Project Helix, a genetic manipulation program designed to target undesirable traits in entire populations, disguised as vaccine research, tested in poor villages, covered up by fabricated clinical trials and charity press releases. It wasn't just evil. It was deliberate genocide dressed as salvation. She watched Voss for 5 nights, learned his habits, his guards, his secrets. He wasn't reckless. He was careful, calculated, but he had one weakness. His legacy. Every night, he visited an underground server vault beneath his private building. The biometric vault. Inside it, the only complete database of Helix experiments, results, failures, test subjects, survivors. She needed it. So on the 6th night, Isabella broke in. The plan was perfect until it WASN single quotes T. She dulled the sensors, cloned the retinal scan, bypassed the handprint ID. But as she reached the main terminal and began transferring the data, the lights flickered. She wasn't alone. "I wondered when the ghost would show herself." Voss's voice echoed through the chamber. He stood at the vault door, flanked by 2 guards in civilian suits, both armed. "I know who you are, Isabella Raeven." She didn't stop the transfer. You murdered villages, she said coldly. I'm just here to return the favor. Voss smiled faintly. Do you think removing me will stop anything? I'm a page in a book you haven't even begun to read. She removed the drive. It's not about stopping, she said. It's about exposing. The lights went dark. Gunfire erupted. Isabella rolled behind the mainframe. Fired once 2 shots, both guards down. When the emergency lights returned, Voss was gone. But she had what she needed. Hours later, half a world away, Project Helix was public. The files were leaked. The images. The voices of test subjects. The video footage of villages left sterile by his experiments. Governments scrambled. Embassies shut down. Voss disappeared off the map. And Isabella? She sat on a rooftop in Morocco, staring at the skyline. She was bleeding. Her arm wrapped in a stolen scarf. Her heart steady. She didn't feel victorious. She felt necessary. Gray called later that night. He's gone. You'll probably never see him again. Isabella stared at the stars. Oh, I will, she said. Because this isn't the end. There was a long pause. Then Gray asked, why are you still doing this? She didn't answer right away, then softly, because I want to live in a world my father would have been proud of. Silence, and then he said what she already knew. There's no going back, Raven. She smiled. I know. The Foundation was officially denied by every government on Earth. No such group exists. That's what the press secretary said on camera the day after. Project Helix leaked, but Isabella Raeven knew better. She had walked into their house, stolen their secrets, watched the rats scatter when the lights turned on. But rats don't vanish. They relocate, regroup, multiply. She also knew Dr. Alden Voss was alive, vanished like smoke. But not gone, not dead, just deeper now. In the wind. And in that silence, something new was building. It started with a phone call, encrypted, bounced through 7 countries. Gray's voice was tight, controlled. We intercepted chatter out of Zurich. They're planning something public. Who? The Foundation. We don't know the name of the operation yet. But they're referring to it as Stage Seraphim. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Where? They're moving pieces. In Istanbul. But our best lead is a woman named Naira Calvetti. She's ex-Mossad, now a fixer for high-tier clients. Operates in Europe, freelance mostly. But we have reason to believe she's tied to the Foundation. How? She helped Voss disappear. That was enough. Istanbul was chaos wrapped in poetry. The city pulsed with life, but beneath it ran something colder, movements in shadows, whispers in alleys. Messages exchanged between ghosts. Isabella found Naira within 72 hours. She was everything. The rumors said elegant, deadly, impossible to pin down. She moved through clubs, art galleries, and private deals like smoke through silk. Always smiling. Always surrounded by powerful men who had no idea. They were feeding information to a predator. Isabella didn't confront her. She watched. Listened. Waited. Until one night, in a private rooftop club overlooking the Bosphorus, Isabella approached Naira, looked up from her drink, and locked eyes with her instantly. Recognition. Amusement. You're the ghost, she said. You're the one hiding the devil, Isabella replied. Naira sipped her wine. You're brave. I'm efficient. Ahmet beat past. Then Naira leaned forward. I could sell you out right now, but you won't. Why not? Because the people you're working for don't value loyalty. Just utility. The moment you're a liability, you're dead. I'm offering you something else. Naira smirked. A cause? A choice. That night changed everything. Because Naira didn't betray her. She gave her something far more valuable. Access. Encrypted files. Contact points, details about Seraphim. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't an assassination. It was ideological warfare. The Foundation planned to release a neurological virus, non-lethal, but precision engineered to destabilize impulse control, moral judgment, and higher empathy functions. It would be released in small batches through food additives, prescription drugs, and even military rations. They weren't just trying to control behavior. They were trying to redefine it. To manufacture a future where obedience replaced compassion, where apathy replaced resistance. Where emotion itself was edited out. And Isabella? She wasn't just fighting for her father anymore, she was fighting for humanity's soul. The trail led to Luxembourg, to a biomedical tech firm hidden in plain sight under the name Neurovance. A gleaming tower of glass and steel. Politicians visited it, universities praised it. But its basement held laboratories where the virus was perfected. Isabella posed as an investor, created a shell identity, spoke the language of money. Let them believe she was one of them. She was given a tour, shown non-public prototypes, and there, behind one sheet of reinforced glass, was Alden Voss. Alive, healthy, smiling. "Miss Black," he said. "I wondered when you'd come." "Don't flatter yourself. You exposed Helix. Good. That was a prototype. Seraphim is evolution. You're not God. I'm better, I'm honest. People don't need free will, they need programming. Kindness is inefficient. Compassion costs. But compliance? That can be scaled." Isabella leaned closer to the glass. "I'm going to rip this place apart. And I'll start with you." He smiled. "Then you'll die before you even reach the server room." She didn't run, she didn't back down. She detonated the building's security system with a virus she uploaded 2 hours before the meeting. Lights dropped, doors unlocked. Firewalls fried. Gray's book strike team stormed the compound. While the board was mid-toast upstairs, and Isabella? She went straight to Voss. They fought in the dark, glass shattered. Alarms screamed. She took a blade across the ribs. He took a syringe to the throat. They both bled, but in the end she stood. He wasn't dead, not quite, but comatose. His final words before falling unconscious: "They'll never stop. You're just one woman." She looked down at him, and whispered, "That's one more than you can handle." The files were leaked, the virus research exposed. Governments denied. Involvement, mass recalls began. The Foundation's stocks crashed. But no one claimed responsibility, because ghosts don't need credit, they need change. Later, in a quiet train cabin crossing into Austria, Isabella sat beside Naira, both of them bruised and silent. "Why do you keep going?" Naira asked. Isabella looked out at the cold landscape and said softly, "Because I know how it feels to be forgotten. I won't forget the world that let them kill my father. And I won't let it do it again to anyone else." Naira didn't answer, but she nodded. Isabella Raeven disappeared again. No headlines. No press, but somewhere in a dark boardroom a man lit a cigar and said, "The ghost has teeth." And across the world another name was whispered in fear, because the Foundation knew now. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. The train cut through the Austrian highlands like a silver whisper. Snow flurried against the windows. Inside the private cabin, Isabella Raeven sat in silence, her breath steady, her eyes heavy-lidded but alert. Naira Calvetti sat across from her, a deep scar along her jaw and a bandage wrapped beneath her blazer. Neither of them had spoken much since crossing the border. There was no need to. Some battles leave you hollow, not because you regret them, but because they cost everything inside of you to win. Voss was down. Seraphim was dismantled. But the Foundation? Still breathing, weaker, yes, but regrouping. Retooling. "You said once this wasn't about revenge," Naira finally said, her voice raspy from smoke and injury. Isabella looked at her. "It's not. Then what is it?" Isabella stared out at the mountains. "It's about balance. You can't burn half the world and call it control. You can't poison a generation's empathy and call it evolution. They rewrite the rules." "I tear up the script." Naira leaned forward. "What if they never stop?" Isabella smiled faintly. "Then neither do I." Their destination was Vienna, but not for rest. They had a meeting. An off-record contact known only as Vector. Former Swiss intelligence. Now deep black freelancer with access to untraceable surveillance networks. Ghost satellites, and something even rarer. A map of the Foundation's communication system. Not just people. Not just names, but how the monster breathed. They met in the catacombs beneath an old cathedral. The smell of dust and stone hung heavy. Vector was already waiting, a short man with cybernetic implants in both hands, a pale eye that flickered as he scanned, and a cigarette that burned with no smoke. "I didn't think you were real," he said when Isabella entered. "I get that. A lot." Naira stood back, arms crossed. Vector motioned to a crate. Inside, a massive rig powered by liquid-cooled drives and a military-grade motherboard. This, he said, is the last known surviving link to Nexus, the Foundation's ghost. Network. If you want to find their leadership, this is how. Isabella stepped closer. What's the catch? Vector took a slow drag. It's encrypted using a reactive AI firewall. You try to brute force it, it destroys itself. You need someone who knows their rhythm. Their patterns. I can read rhythm, Isabella replied. Especially when it's the same one that killed my father. He smirked. Then plug in. It took 72 hours. No sleep. No light. Just coding, cracking, bleeding through lines of logic and digital. Traps. And then it opened. Not all of it, but enough. 13 names. Board level. Operatives, coordinators, arms dealers, former diplomats. Corporate ghosts. Men and women who didn't exist on any record yet moved armies like pawns. The file was titled Directive Eden. Beneath it, a schedule. A date. 22 days from now. Geneva. Something was coming bigger than Seraphim. Bigger than Helix, and at the center of it all? The Eden Protocol. Gray flew in within 48 hours. They met in an abandoned opera house. He looked older than before, more tired. More aware that they were standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying. I saw the files, he said, voice. Whoa, this isn't sabotage. This is endgame strategy. What is Eden? Isabella asked. He handed her a drive. Everything we know. It's not just biological or political. It's ideological cleansing. They want to reshape the world not through war but through compliance. Control the global currency. Control food distribution. Control access to memory itself. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Memory? They're testing neurowipe implants. Targeted amnesia. You forget everything they want you to forget. Naira stepped closer. That's not power, that's godhood. Isabella exhaled. Then it's time we remind them they bleed. The plan was simple. Geneva. Eden Summit, a gathering of billionaires, executives, and political figureheads massed as a humanitarian tech summit hosted at a private mountain retreat with military-grade defenses. Inside, Eden would be launched, a new infrastructure rolled out globally within hours. Biometric tethering, mass psychological profiling, real-time compliance scoring systems embedded in education, food access, medicine. Total systemic obedience, unless Isabella got there first. They arrived on the 19th day. 3 days before launch, the retreat was carved into the side of Mont Salavi, a fortress of ice and stone, disguised as a winter think tank. Inside, the 13, the same ones from the Nexus files. And at their head, a new name, Remiel. No last name, no photos, no data. Just Remiel, a ghost, worse than Voss. Worse than Cain. Because countered resistance. Not guards. Not drones. Children. Teenagers. Mind wiped. Neurologically conditioned. Remiel's future. Trained not just to protect, but to obey without emotion. Human FIRAWLLS. Isabella hesitated only once. Then she used an EMP grenade. No deaths. But enough to drop the implants and scramble their orders. And then straight to the core. The Eden server room was like a cathedral, massive towers of data. Cooling systems humming like an organ. And in the center, a glass chamber with a console, Remiel. Waited there. Alone. Wearing white, smiling. I wondered how long before you reached me, Isabella Raeven. She raised her pistol. End it now. He opened his arms. I'm not your enemy. I'm your evolution. She stepped forward. You're not evolution. You're a virus with good PR. Behind her, Naira was working fast, breaking through. Eden's locks prepping the virus Vector gave them. Remiel kept talking. You kill me, another takes my place. You stop this signal, a new one rises. But if you join us, Isabella didn't let him. Finished. One shot through the glass, straight between the eyes. The tower collapsed within 6 minutes. Eden was gone. Files scattered globally to journalists. Hackers, war tribunals. The world woke up in shock, and once again the ghost disappeared. Geneva was still burning not with fire but with truth. 3 days after the fall of Eden, the world was in upheaval. Every major media outlet was drowning in leaked files, surveillance footage, confessions, and names. For the first time in decades, the Foundation had a face, and Remuel's cold, dead stare became the cover story on every screen. But for Isabella Raeven, it wasn't victory. It was escalation. Because the Foundation wasn't dead. It was awakening. Phase 2. That was what the decrypted message read. Intercepted less than 24 hours after Eden's collapse. Short, cold, delivered through a quantum encrypted channel buried beneath layers of dead servers. Remuel was just one head. Isabella had cut it off, but now the body was angry. Gray. Met Isabella and Naira in an old monastery in the Austrian Alps. Snow blanketed the world outside. Inside, candlelight flickered against the stone walls as they reviewed the fragments from the Eden mainframe. So what's phase 2? Isabella asked, her voice sharper now, tired, focused. Gray passed her a tablet. They've activated a fallback directive. No more slow control, no more psychology. This is direct. Physical, tactical, global. A destabilization program. Meaning? They're going to create chaos. Civil unrest, famine, economic collapse in key zones. All orchestrated, all artificial. Naira leaned in. Why now? Gray looked at Isabella. Because they want to flush you out. You hit them too hard. Too fast. Now they want the world so distracted you have nowhere left to hide. Isabella stared at the map. Red dots. Nations on the brink. Riots already starting in Indonesia. Crop failures in Kenya. A cyber attic in Sao Paulo that killed hospital power. For 12 hours. Everything. Coordinated, they couldn't stop it all, but they could cut the fuse. The trail led to Barcelona, to a man named Luca Virelli, an Italian industrialist turned intelligence broker, one of the few survivors from Eden, who hadn't gone underground yet. He was Foundation adjacent. Never in leadership, but always circling power. Funded many of their early systems. Believed in managed collapse. Believed the world had to suffer before it could be reborn. He was also holding a chaos key, a digital ledger containing the execution plans for phase 2. Without that key, the system couldn't coordinate attacks, but he wasn't going to hand it over, and the summit he was hosting in Barcelona was filled with corporate allies, private militia contractors and defense ministers willing to kill to keep the order intact. Infiltration was brutal. No disguises. No fancy gala. Just war. Naira posed as a Ukrainian arms dealer. Isabella went in as her second. Gray's team set charges around the building's relay. Towers to jam. COMS. It was a full-on strike, room by room. Guard by guard, until they reached the penthouse. There, Virelli waited, surrounded by data screens and a tactical response unit on standby. He didn't run. He smiled. You're exactly what they said you were. Ruthless, efficient, beautiful in the way a wildfire is beautiful. You're stalling, Isabella said, leveling her weapon. No, Virelli replied. I'm recording. He gestured to the corner. A live stream was broadcasting their faces. To whom? She didn't know, she didn't care, she shot the camera. Then, she shot his hand, the one reaching for the terminal. He screamed, and then he talked. Everything. Where the key was stored. How did we get this far? Naira admitted. I figured we'd be dead by Eden. Isabella sipped her coffee. We still might be. Then why keep going? Isabella's voice was quieter now, measured. Because I've seen the world without shadows, Naira. I lived it once. With my family, before Cain, before Voss, before this war. There was laughter, music, simplicity. I want a world where that's possible again. Naira was quiet for a while. Then she asked, and when it is? Isabella looked at her, eyes fierce. Then I disappear, for good. The next morning, Gray handed Isabella a sealed envelope. She raised an eyebrow. What now? He looked tired, pale. This isn't about the Foundation. Not directly, it's personal. Inside was a photograph, Daniel Raeven, her father only. Older standing beside an unfamiliar man in a desert. The time stamp? 2 weeks before his death. She stared at it for a long time. What is this? Gray looked away. We got this from an intercepted Foundation archive. We thought your father died clean, straightforward. But this changes everything. Isabella's heart twisted. Where was this taken? Morocco. A town called Imilchil. Her hands trembled. She buried her father's story in Revenge, but now? There was another thread, one she had never pulled. The village of Eniltril sat buried in the Atlas Mountains like a secret too old to tell. Snow dusted the peaks. Wind sang through narrow stone alleys. It was a place where time bent differently, where technology hadn't fully sunk its claws. And where names could vanish if spoken too loudly. Isabella Raeven arrived alone. No satellite backup. No strike team. No. Gray. This was personal. She carried only two things: a photo of her father taken 2 weeks before his murder, and the desire to know whether Daniel Raeven had secrets she never uncovered. The man beside her father in the photo was the first mystery. Older, weathered, eyes sharp, a scar on his left temple. No name, no record in government databases. But locals in Imilchil remembered him. They called him Yusuf, and they spoke his name with a mix of reverence and fear. He had lived just outside town in a small stone house overlooking a dried-up riverbed. Some said he was an ex-intelligence officer. Others claimed he was a doctor. A few insisted he was a ghost, one of those men who helped entire governments fall without ever touching a weapon. Isabella found the house easily, but Yusuf was long dead. Inside, she found paper, handwritten journals, maps, and most shockingly, a full dossier labeled in Daniel Raeven's handwriting. Foundation, precursor evidence. Her breath caught in her throat. Her father hadn't stumbled into the conspiracy. He had been investigating it long before Cain, long before Eden. He knew, he had always known. The pages told a chilling story. Over a decade earlier, Daniel Raeven had been working with Yusuf to trace a series of missing aid shipments that vanished between Libya and Nigeria. They believed the thefts were part of a wider operation funded not by rebel groups, but by something more powerful. Something hidden, a network, a system of engineered instability. They followed the trail into broken supply chains, manipulated currencies, and fake medical charities. The Foundation's fingerprints, only they didn't have a name for it yet. They called it the Silence. Yusuf had been close to exposing it, but before he could go public, his son was murdered. A warning. He disappeared after that. And Daniel? He took the files and left. Until the day he too was silenced. As Isabella pieced through her father's final notes, one entry stood outdated 2 days before his death. He warned me, said they're watching. Told me not to trust anyone, not even the agencies. Gray may be compromised. If I vanish, tell her the answer is in the cipher. Cipher? She turned the page. Blank. Then another. Until she found it. Taped to the back of the final journal page, a narrow strip of translucent plastic, a digital shard. A cipher key. Back in the village. She used an old laptop to decrypt it. Coordinates appeared. Sudan. Along with a voice memo. Old, shaky, her father's voice. Bella, if you're hearing this, I'm already gone. But I think I found the root, not the foundation, the root of the root. A place called Halassa, off-grid. You won't find it on any satellite. But they built something there, something ancient. Something borrowed. If this reaches you, be careful. They aren't just building power. They're erasing memory, culture, identity. And if they succeed, there won't be a world left to save. She closed the laptop slowly. Naira's voice crackled through the secure unit she'd buried in her duffel. I tracked your location. Still breathing? Yeah, you found something, didn't you? Yes, Isabella said quietly. I found why they killed him. The next day, Isabella left Imilchil behind, but not before visiting Yusuf's grave. She placed a stone atop it, not just for him, but for all the names that had been buried to keep silence alive. She whispered, your work isn't forgotten. And then she left for Sudan. It took 5 days of bribing smugglers, walking miles through dry terrain, and crossing checkpoints without official documents. But she found Eche El Asada, an abandoned military complex surrounded by dust and rusted barbed wire, except it wasn't abandoned. It was active. And underground. What lay beneath? Halassa wasn't a lab. It was an archive, a carved-out mountain vault, filled with digital history, erased ethnic records, banned literature, stolen data sets from global universities. Foundation wasn't just trying to control the future. They were rewriting the UN. Past. Cultures wiped from memory. Events removed from textbooks. Languages lost. It wasn't just genocide. It was erasure. Clean slate. So they could write their own truth. As Isabella moved through the archive. She found Daniel's name again, and Yusuf's files, tagged with red warnings, evidence that they had discovered the purpose of the archive years ago, but they hadn't been able to reach it. Isabella had. She copied everything. Then planted the demolition. Codes Gray had once entrusted her with the kind only to be used if a threat exceeded. Protocol. This was it. HALASA was the heart of the lie, and it had to burn. She detonated the charges at dawn. From the ridge above the canyon. She watched the earthquake and the mountain's breath collapse into smoke and fire. The Foundation's past burned beneath the sand, and with it, part of her father's soul was freed. Gray met her in Cairo. He didn't ask questions, just poured her tea and said, "You did it, didn't you?" She nodded. "But I'm not done." "No, I didn't think you were." He slid another folder across the table. Inside, another name, one of the original architects of the Foundation. Alive, in hiding. In New York. Isabella looked up. Eyes sharpened. Jaw set. Then softly, "Then we go home." The plane descended through a slate gray sky as New York City rose into view like a steel giant waking from slumber. Rain streaked across the windows, and for a brief moment, Isabella Raeven's reflection stared back at her, quiet, composed, but carved with shadows. The city wasn't just another target. It was personal. This was where her father once stood tall as an analyst with Interpol's intelligence branch. This was where the Foundation started tracking her family. And this, according to Gray's intel, was where the last known architect of the Foundation had gone to disappear. His name was Walter Emmerich, age 78. Officially, he was a retired policy advisor, and officially, he was one of 5 men who originally drafted the silencing doctrine, a prototype for what would become the Foundation's earliest playbook: media manipulation, cultural dismantling, economic tampering, and psychological control through policy. But the others were dead. Only Emmerich remained, and Isabella didn't come for questions. She came for an ending. She checked into a rundown motel in Queens using a synthetic identity. The rain hadn't let up in days, but that was good. She preferred to move in the storm. Noise was her ally. NYRA landed the following night, operating under the alias Julia Bell. She met Isabella inside a broken diner booth at 2 a.m., armed with surveillance reports and 2 burner phones. "He's hiding in plain sight," Nara said. "Park Slope, gated townhouse. 1 bodyguard on record, retired vet. Quiet routine. Grocery on Wednesdays, art gallery every Sunday. Doesn't talk to anyone?" "Until now," Isabella said. "But here's the twist," Naira added. "He's not alone. We tracked encrypted messages coming in and out of his townhouse. Someone else is there. Possibly a successor. Female, late 30s, sharp profile. Number. Confirmed ID. His legacy. Exactly." Isabella's expression darkened. "He's grooming her to rebuild what we've destroyed." The stackout began immediately. Gray helped run satellite loops and security footage while they watched. The townhouse from an abandoned building across the street. The woman inside was methodical, rarely left. Worked at night. Occasionally received briefcases from nondescript men who never stayed more than 5 minutes. Her name finally came back after a week of digging. Celia Brandt, doctorate in computational behaviorism, former UN consultant. Once flagged by MI6 suspicious activity in Lebanon. And now? The last inheritor of the Foundation's ideology. They're transferring the codes, Naira whispered during one late-night watch. Walter's giving her the root systems. "If we let them finish, we'll never find her again." "We won't let them," Isabella replied, "but we can't just go in loud. It's New York, one mistake and every agency comes down on us." "Then we go in quiet," Isabella said, standing. "We cut the head off the serpent before it slithers into a new skin." The next night was rain and wind. The power grid flickered across the borough. Isabella moved through it like a memory. Her entry point, the side alley disguised as construction. Her cover, a city maintenance worker. Inside her satchel, the quiet tools of death: the EMP disabler, tranquilizer darts, ceramic blade, and a single silencer-loaded pistol. Naira kept watch from across the street, feeding camera blind spots through earpiece updates. At 2:13 a.m., Isabella slipped inside. Emmeric's townhouse was filled with books. Thick, dusty, ancient. Philosophy, psychology, military doctrine. There were no digital devices and sight-only notebooks filled with scrawled predictions. Names, red-stamped documents, and obsolete encryption keys. At the heart of it all sat Walter Emmerich. Old, calm, waiting. "You made it," he said, as if she were arriving for tea. "You expected me? I knew you'd come eventually. You've been killing my ghosts." "I'm here for your ghosts too." He smiled faintly. "You don't understand what you've done. I've dismantled your machine." He tapped a notebook gently. "No, you forced evolution. We no longer need systems. We need visionaries. He pointed toward the hallway, is better than I ever was. She doesn't need war. She understands influence. Trust. She builds something you'll never see coming." "I will," Isabella replied, "because I'm ending it tonight." A noise from behind. Celia. Holding a gun. Shaking, but only slightly. "You don't have to do this," Isabella said, turning to face her. "I believe in what we built." Celia replied, "You think you're justice, but you're just a variable we didn't account for. Then let's adjust the outcome." Before Celia could pull the trigger, Naira entered from the rear balcony, silently, one dart. Straight to the neck. Celia collapsed, unconscious. Walter stared at Isabella. "She'd come back," he whispered. "You'll never kill the idea?" Isabella stepped forward. "I don't need to kill the idea." She raised the pistol. "I just need to bury it so deep no one finds it again." The shot echoed once. Then silence. They destroyed the files, erased. The ledgers burned the notebooks. The house burned too carefully timed with a gas leak, disguised as an accident. Celia? She woke up 12 hours later in a safe house, stripped of all data access, placed under permanent observation by Gray's most loyal operatives. A ghost. Silence. But alive. Because Isabella wasn't here to become the thing she thought. She was here to end it properly. Later, as she and Naira stood on a rooftop in Brooklyn, watching the smoke rise from Park Slope, Isabella finally breathed freely. "Is it done?" Naira asked. Isabella looked at her. Eyes steady, heart heavy. "Yes." Then she whispered, "I've been chasing shadows for 6 years, and now I can finally see the sun." They say when you kill a monster, the silence that follows is never peaceful. For Isabella Raeven, it was almost unbearable. In the weeks following Walter Emmerich's death and Celia Brandt's capture, the world slowly quieted. Protests died down, the chaos chain broke. And although the world didn't know her name, it felt her work, but silence wasn't peace. It was weight. It was reflection. It was grief surfacing after a war was over. 3 months later, Oslo, Norway. The mountains were covered in frost. Isabella sat in a small cabin overlooking the sea, the journal of her father open beside her, pages weathered, corners folded. Dry blood from a different life. She read it every morning, not to mourn, but to remember, not what she lost, but why. She fought. Gray visited once. Unannounced. He brought no folder. No weapons. Just 2 mugs of black coffee and a small box. He sat across from her on the porch in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "You did it," he said. She didn't answer. "You stopped something ancient. Something dangerous, and for the first time in my career. I don't have anyone to chase." She finally looked at him. "Then what do we do?" He smiled faintly. "We live." Then he handed her the box. Inside, a ring. Simple silver. Her father's, recovered from a locker in Brussels. The last thing Daniel Raeven ever hid from the world. "I thought it was lost," she whispered. "It was, until we followed one of Yusuf's last leads. He had it stored as insurance. For you." Isabella closed her fingers around it. And for the first time in years, she felt warmth. Celia Brandt had disappeared. Not by force. Not by escape. By design. Gray's team had relocated her to an isolated facility in Greenland under diplomatic cover. No one in, no one out. Not for punishment, but for preservation. She was a prisoner not of bars, but of a future that no longer needed her. Her work was gone, her movement shattered. But one day, she might be useful. If the world ever forgot the cost of blind obedience again. Naira stayed close physically and emotionally. They weren't lovers, not exactly. But they shared a bond built in war. And war had a way of reshaping love into something more quiet. More profound. They shared long silences, long walks, and never had to say out loud what they both understood. They were done running, one morning. Isabella walked the trail behind the cabin and stopped at the cliff's edge. The sun was low, casting gold across the water. Snowflakes floated in the air like ghosts letting go. She held her father's ring tight, then pulled out a small recording device. She pressed record. My name is Isabella Raeven. My father was murdered by men who believed control was more important than truth. I spent 6 years chasing them, killing them, dismantling their empire. Not because I was angry, not because I was a hero, but because I was a daughter. I did things I'll never speak of. Things that can't be undone, but I didn't lose myself. If you ever hear this, if the world ever begins to feel colder again, remember, justice doesn't live in systems. It lives in the hands of those willing to burn the map and draw a better one. She stopped recording. Then threw the device into the ocean. It sank quietly like her vengeance. Like her name. A year passed then too, and one day, in a classroom in Berlin, a little girl opened a new history textbook. Inside, for the first time, were pages about Project Helix, about Eden Protocol, about how the world nearly fell to silence. There were no names. Just stories. Just truth. And in the back of the book, one small dedication to the one who stood in the dark so we could find the light. Epilogue. Unknown date. Unknown location. A young intelligence analyst clicked into a secure server, one flagged by an old buried Foundation archive. A file blinked into view. Only one line displayed, Isabella Raeven, deceased. He frowned. Then the screen flickered and another message appeared. Not from the server but over at .glitchud. Embedded. Don't believe what they tell you. Then it vanished. As if she had never been there, but in the dark corners of power, in the corridors of silence. The ghost still whispered. Because some legacies can't be buried. Only remember it. Asterisk. Thank you for listening my story.